folks. Welcome to another edition of the Omnist Hour. Let me crank the music down to the background. Been about a week since my last podcast. Been out of pocket for a little while, taking care of real world stuff. But I've got a week or so now with my wife and child off in Jakarta. So I'm going to get caught up on a number of topics that I've been percolating. Hard choice, but I decided today to go with a topic that I'm going to call the quantum mechanics of consciousness. Basically, what I'm going to explain to you is how you can prove to yourself the truth that consciousness, thought, creates reality, which is something that there is a fair amount of argument about in the scientific community right now. So let's delve into it. Let me switch to this graphic. Those of you who have ever taken physics classes probably have heard of something called the double slit experiment. This is kind of the basic intro to quantum mechanical behavior. So let's quickly discuss what's up with that. So basically, if you take a particle source, light, electrons, protons, whatever, and shoot them at a target that has an opaque target that has maybe a couple of slits in it, and then go measure their effect on another target, you will find that instead of getting what you would maybe simple-mindedly expect as two peaks, two peaks of particles hitting roughly in front of the two slits, you find that you get an interference pattern, which is typical of a wave. If you've ever seen the same experiment done with water, with waves hitting a barrier, you will, or different portions of a beach and then bouncing back, you should be familiar with how there's some kind of an interference pattern that forms. That's a natural phenomenon of wave behavior. What's less discussed is that these same particles, if you can contrive this experiment so that you only measure the effect of one individual particle going through something like this slit and being measured, the slit thing doesn't work so well because it's hard to get a particle to go exactly from the center point between two slits and into one or the other. You might have to send a lot of particles individually to get one that went so far off the beaten path as to go through one slit or the other. But in fact, what happens is if you actually measure the properties of one individual particle, they behave like a particle, like a solid thing. And you actually see that the particle will appear to make a choice which slit to go through. Or it's more common to do this experiment by measuring a property like spin. Electrons have a property called spin, whether they're spin right, spin left. And in fact, when you go to measure that, the individual particles seem to make a decision. I want to be up or I want to be down. spin up, spin down. This is a facet of science that has puzzled scientists and is the essence of the quantum question. Why does it seem like particles have a mind of their own, at least to some extent? And this is why when doing experiments in the quantum world, particle physics, you have to deal in probabilities. You have to measure a lot of events before you find sort of the distribution of, kind of like taking a census of particles, you know, and finding out how many of them were Republican particles, how many of them are Democrat particles, and how many of them are independents, or green, or libertarian, or, you know, fringe parties that have yet to be named. Kind of the identity politics of particles, if you will. Okay, so what I'm here to tell you is that this is very easy to explain if you accept what I tell you is the truth, that everything has a soul. Particles have a soul. What defines a soul is consciousness. Low level of consciousness is working on a program, does what it's told to do. If it encounters a situation where, gosh, nobody told me what to do when this happens, it has to make a decision. When souls make decisions, they learn and they become more conscious. Now, as the soul vehicle, the vessel that the soul is representing in the physical world becomes more complex, so do the decisions. This elementary particle we've been talking about has very limited decisions. Do I go through this slit or that slit? Am I going to be spin up? Am I going to be spin down? And unconsciously, it effectively flips a die, and 50% of the time it lands up heads, and 50% of the time it lands tails. Unless the soul of that particle happens to be more conscious and consciously decides, I'm going to be spin up. Or when it encounters another particle, I'm going to interact with this other particle in this way. And when I hit it, produce this spray of other particles or whatever. These events that result from the event of a collision. Are you with me? Now, in the early multiverse, just after the Big Bang, the first things that were invented were these elementary particles. And they were experimented with, and they were inhabited by real souls who had been sold on the idea of playing this game of creation, physical creation, in these convenient sandboxes called the universe, an anti-universe of the Big Bang. And each of those universes had sort of a game master, the god of that universe, who established what rules were fair, what rules were used for their game. The game master of the universe is a cat that I call Lucifer, the male demiurge. Why? There was no male or female back then. The male demiurge was basically the volunteer to represent God's ideas of creation based on free will, free choice, and an evolving sense of right and wrong, which came to be known as karma, and who has evolved into a very, very senior creator in her own right. The other side, the anti-universe, is the universe of Borg. Borg is kind of the archenemy of God, although this conflict was a thought conflict. And Borg basically took up the alternate position of defending that souls needed to be told what to do, needed to be governed, needed to be mastered, needed to be ruled. And so Borg's universe is one of control, domination, programming, illusion, outer limits. We control the vertical, we control the horizontal. That's how the Borg team functions. Now, as creation progressed, there came a point where there were enough particles that kind of creation wasn't so much fun anymore, because how things worked is whatever was invented in either universe, and God's universe was obviously the more creative one, had the more wide range of ideas, diversity of ideas being tried, experimented with, than the Borg side. The Borg side tended to just watch God's universe and pull what they found useful and made it the law. And in their universe. And outside of all this, the observers of this experiment were watching, looking at what was going on in the two universes and deciding the rules for the bigger picture, the multiverse. And those laws became enforced in both universes. So, I mean, this explains why there's matter and antimatter. One universe is based on matter, one is based on antimatter, but you can create the other in the other universe. Just easy to get annihilated by running into its alter ego. Okay, so that game got kind of boring, and there weren't a lot of decisions left to be made, not a lot of new particles to be invented. At least they didn't think so at the time. Electrons, protons, hydrogen atoms, that's enough to start a new game. Let's see what happens when we collect enough of these things into a group to set off some kind of new process. And the first stars were born. Gravity was invented. Stellar combustion was invented and experimented with. And, basically that game led to another game of, well, you know, when we burn up all the hydrogen, what happens? Then is the game over? Well, no, it was a fun game. Let's play something else. Hey, let's invent fusion and make more complicated soul vehicles. Other elements. That game was a lot of fun for a while. Then there was like, okay, we got a bunch of elements. We see how this game goes. Are we learning anything more by creating bigger ones? Yeah, not really. This isn't fun anymore. Let's invent something new. Let's invent planets. Ooh, now we can do something with all those elements that were kind of free-ranging inside stars, not getting to do much chemistry as yet. And planets gave the opportunity of having a test tube for creating the laws of chemistry, putting atoms together into molecules, molecules together in more complicated molecules. Eventually putting together forms that were quite complex and could act out the fantasies of the souls that inhabited them quite satisfactorily, and fight the creative battles much more efficiently than throwing planets at each other, throwing stars at each other, throwing galaxies at each other, which was a fun game, but got kind of old, especially when your favorite planet got destroyed by somebody else, some oaf's star or asteroid or whatever. It's like, hey, quit messing in my sandbox. Okay, so the game kind of shifted to soul vehicles that were planetary, based on constructions of elements which became as complex as the things that we call robots. Basically, self-directed, soul-directed collections of matter that were adapted for different purposes. And it became all the rage to basically build better bots, better transformers, recruit armies of transformers, some fully programmed, zero-level consciousness souls, others maybe of more conscious souls that you had recruited to be the leaders of your army. And Borg and God continued the creative struggle through these androids, who, yes, did discover ways to get themselves to other planets, to other galaxies, all over the place. In fact, they didn't have to deal with the problems of survival in space. They were making it up as they went. And at that point of the game, the souls, the more conscious souls that were the original gods, could pretty much incarnate anywhere at any time. So if you didn't like the transformer you were running on your planet, you would go construct a transformer on your enemy's planet and try to hide the construction long enough for you to build an army and conquer their planet. That's kind of how the game was played in that era. And this was a game that Borg was pretty good at. The Borg team thought they were going to win and conquer both universes, and, you know, game over. We proved that authoritarian tyranny, a rule by the one almighty God of the universe, is the best way to go. No, that didn't happen. God's team kept creating and developed self-programming soul vehicles who could send their programming to other planets, making them more beautiful, less likely to be destroyed because, oh, the planet is just so cute. Let's not destroy it. Let's just let's colonize it. And that's how DNA was invented. It was invented as a beautifier, planet beautifier, plant beautifier. Plants were the first higher consciousness soul vehicles that were not inhabited by the gods. They were created as beautifier slaves, but to allow them to create some beauty, you had to give them some consciousness. This was the first slave species created by the old gods. They were allowed to grow in consciousness, to become aware enough of their surroundings to create beauty, which means that they had at least a basic, some of them that had at least a basic understanding of spirituality. They understood something more than simple programming. They had a bit of the creative spark. They were thought to be not very threatening, so they were allowed to spread far and wide. No one realizing that they were invented and sent out to infect the multiverse right here on this cute little planet, Gaia. Well, actually our solar system. The planet that they were invented on got destroyed. It was the one that used to occupy the space that is now the asteroid belt. They thought they had killed the source of the virus, the plant virus. After they figured out, oh, and we know how to do this too. We can manipulate DNA. We can make our own creations. And this was the counter invasion. They created as their countermeasure insects, allowing the plants to think that the insects were their slaves, when in fact the insects were invading the places where the intelligent plants were and seeking them out and destroying them. That's one of the old stories of this planet, this solar system. At any rate, consciousness is the seed of creation, the seed of all creation. And it is the gift of the Creator, the first Creator, and his first family, who were a fairly dysfunctional family like most are. And you can imagine, well, I think you're seeing right now how dysfunctional families can be when they've been allowed to create a fantasy world of their own imagination without anybody telling them, well, you know what, that's not really true. That's not really how things work. or them accepting it. How many people do you know that will reject real science in favor of popular science? Fauci said, woo! No, the mouthpieces of science that we meet in the media are recruited for their ability to be PR salesmen, not for any particular scientific capability, not for any creativity, not for any inspiration, for their ability to package, spin as truth. This is what all of these folks do. If they're making money online, especially money from corporate sources or state sources, they're PR salesmen. They're not scientists. They're not artists. They're not really creators in the God sense of the word. They are board creators. They are creators of lies, creators of fantasies. Now that's a great thing, because we need lies and fantasies, don't we? They inspire real science. They inspire people to do good things. They can just as easily inspire people to do evil. And if you've ever been around, well, I'll go back to an example from my teenhood, or I guess 20hood, in college. I was in college when the first Dungeons and Dragons craze hit, and was, like the most popular game for sort of the geek set. The artists and the scientists that didn't fit in with the frat crowd. Okay? And I played Dungeons and Dragons with my fellow geeks during college. It was a wonderful time, wonderful memories of that. And what I remember most is the strong personalities that came out playing this game. I remember one guy who identified so strongly with elves that for all intents and purposes, he was an elf. Kind of looked like an elf, frankly. And he was always wanting to be the dungeon master. Rarely played a character, even though he was, Mr. Elf himself. He was a control freak, wanted to be the one that rolled the dice and made the decisions, what happens next. Another character that sometimes showed up was this guy named Kirby, who had a fascination with orcs. And I swear the guy looked like a human orc. He was big, bulky, not very handsome, and go figure. That anybody familiar, I think most people are familiar with the Tolkien universe, that has had an incredible amount of effect on our species, even though it's not reality. It's fantasy. That's how the multiverse works. That's why we need more than just the facts, man. The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Because that would be a very boring universe. It wouldn't be very stimulating of creativity. This is why I kind of laugh at the folks that are completely dedicated to truth, justice, and the American way. all of these slogans and stuff that we give ourselves to prop up our egos, right? I get just as frustrated with folks that are so in love with their fantasies that they will ignore truth when it's slapping them right in the face. This is why I don't have very much good to say about the law of attraction nuts, because they are nuts. It's a cult. You don't get to create anything you want, and I think I've shown you in this discussion why that's true. Because you have limitations. The limitations are the laws of the multiverse. They are immutable, at least until somebody proves that there's something better, or they get their own universe where they can make the laws. And yes, there are other universes. That's why we call it a multiverse. That's why we all co-created the game of souls, which is based upon the laws of reincarnation and karma. This is how we play the game over and over until we figure out what kind of universe we want to live in, or we need to live in. There are many fantasy universes. Some of them serve to be what I call vacation universes, where souls can go for some R&R when they're a little bit too stressed by whatever they've been working on in their path. There are other universes that are heavens, I would call them, where souls are seeking inspiration and guidance to get closer to what they have defined as their personal spiritual goals. And spiritual goals are not just about religion. They're not just about being a god. Not every soul is cut out to be a god. Most souls are going to find some passion eventually that is useful, even if it's only a passion for raising healthy, well-adjusted children of a given species in a given culture. Yes, there are souls that do that. They live again and again in certain time periods, in certain cultures, and raise healthier children in that timeline. And that's how we make things better. When things get better enough that maybe you need to change the whole timeline, there are souls that specialize in manipulating time, manipulating timelines. This is how the future can change. Even the past can change, though that's not so easy to get approved. Yes, time travel is a reality. It doesn't work exactly like you think it does. Let's see, what else do I need to talk about? Quantum mechanics of consciousness. Get back on topic a little bit more. Okay, oh yes. You can prove to yourself that this is true. You can do a little experiment yourself. Okay. Someday when you're not too stressed, when there's not too much going on that your brain goes into subconscious reaction mode, I want you to stop when you're about to make an automatic decision, or when you're unsure of something relatively important to you, like whether I go get another Starbucks or where I suggest going to lunch with my colleagues. And before you face that decision or that negotiation with other souls, I want you to consciously think about what's coming. Think about what are the normal outcomes, what are your expected outcomes, and I want you to consciously come up with a different scenario. Say, well, okay, this is what I would normally do. This is how they would normally react. I'm not going to do that this time. I'm going to consciously throw a wrench in this whole process. And see what happens. Now, don't take too big a risk here, right? But this is the way that you can prove to yourself that thought creates reality. This technique is the real truth behind the exaggerated lie of the law of attraction. And you can use, here's another good example that will be a bit of self-help to many people. If you're one of those people that finds it difficult to meet new people, make new friends, you can do this experiment. And many self-help practitioners will suggest this. Here it is. Every day, you make it your goal to interact with 5 new people, random people that you encounter. And make that interaction last, if possible, long enough to learn something deeply human about that other person. Get them to mention their family. Get them to talk about what's stressing them. Get them to share their political views or their religious views. Whatever. Don't approach it as a challenge, that you've got to be afraid of. Just make it part of your natural everyday, changing your behavior, doing something different. And I guarantee you, if you do that experiment, within a week or two, you will have fallen into a new pattern of behavior. You can use this if you're very shy with the other sex, or if you have a tendency to fall into relationships with people that latch onto you, want to use you and manipulate you, instead of ones who want to engage in a more balanced and fair, a more harmonious relationship. It's a very useful experiment, and one that will get you a lot more mileage than joining the law of attraction cult. And it is a cult. What's the difference between a cult and a religion? That's a good question. I don't know if I should go there today, maybe make that a separate talk, but think about that. What's the difference between a cult and a religion? What's the difference between truth and fantasy? And try to do it without demonizing one or the other. Also without completely embracing one or the other. Because there is evil in dogmatically choosing a side. That's essentially what you're doing when you embrace a religion that you have no personal awareness of the truth of. When you say the Bible is my gospel, and you've never actually met a biblical character. You've never met a spiritual Christian. I mean, a spirit Christian, not just some human who says, I'm a Christian, come to my church and I'll tell you exactly how to be a good Christian. You see the difference? Cult, religion, neither one is an answer. Religions can become cults if they become too dogmatic and ignore truth. And truth gets unfolded through knowledge. Where does knowledge come from? Not just science, experience. Science hasn't figured out a way to measure spiritual experience, to quantify it. They're starting to. The fringes of science are starting to become aware of a bigger picture that can't be explained by materialist science. This is why in so many of my discussions I like to mention the work of Dr. Ian Stevenson. And I will again here, in case you haven't heard me talk before. I'm not going to talk too long about him, but basically this is a scientist who observed the fact that so many accounts existed, particularly in certain parts of the world, of children remembering past lives, remembering reincarnation. And he wondered if that was just kind of a fantasy that went with believing in Hinduism, believing in reincarnation, or if there was any truth to it. So he conducted an experiment. He went out. Now, you can't do an experiment like this. This is a social experiment. Social experiments are a little bit different. Social science is a harder science to pursue. What he did, though, was went out and found children whose parents had reported this kind of past life memory experience. And I think he looked at maybe about 4,000 kids worldwide in his final study. And he interviewed them and did very careful research on what they said about their past life memories. Memories like places, names, events, family secrets, etc., etc. And then followed up to find the people or descendants of the people that they claimed they had experienced a past life of. And what he discovered was, although this is more reported in the Hindu world, because reincarnation is accepted as a truth, and it's not you're not considered crazy if you talk about remembering a past life, as you would be in the West, and told, "Oh, my kid has such a crazy imagination. He must be something wrong. I gotta put him on Ritalin, take him to a doctor, and get him some drugs." In fact, even Western kids, in fact, the most famous case that he discovered was one of a young American boy who had memories of being a pilot in World War II. He knew what ship he had been on. He knew what mission he had flown. missions he had flown. He knew the names of his squadron members, of people that he'd met, the family secrets, things that were like, there were things that were maybe in the newspaper at the time that were not true, but only the family would have known. He showed without a doubt, without a shred of doubt, that that kid had had a past life recollection, a very strong one, around this pilot who died in one of the big battles of World War II. I can't remember if it was Midway or Coral Sea. One of those two, I think. At any rate, go do your research. Reincarnation is absolutely a real thing. And here's an extension to that experiment I gave you. For extra credit, when you're going, if you have a chance to do this experiment and you're facing really a more important decision that has moral consequences, you're deciding whether to go out drinking with your buddies, lie about it to your wife, you're deciding whether to masturbate to porn in secret, whatever it is, I want you to think, as you're thinking about the options that you could take, what you could do, I want you to see if you have a spiritual feeling about one or the other. What might be the right path, what might be leading you to something that's not so nice, it's kind of dark. And I'm not telling you there's one or the other that's right. One of the things that I always stress is that people have different addictions, and addictions aren't necessarily bad. Addictions are passions, attachments to behaviors, to people, to substances. Those attachments are not necessarily bad, unlike the Buddhist ego killers will try to tell you. Attachment is not a bad thing. It is not going to hold you back from enlightenment. Attachments are how we learn about ourselves. They are souls entwined with our path, for better or worse. And what we do with them is how we consciously or unconsciously guide our path. If you unconsciously pursue your addictions, heedless of the effects that they might have on you and others, this is how you create dark karma, right? If you're passionate, well, I mean, look at somebody like Einstein, for instance. A messiah of science is how I would characterize this man. Was he perfect? No. His attachments made him a really poor husband. He was a philanderer. He mistreated his wife and kids. He was not a very good father either. Does that mean we should demonize him? Tear down all his statues? No. He was learning, and he was focusing on what were his passions at the time and dealing with them. Now contrast Einstein with a Tesla. Tesla was a man passionate about science, but he was more passionate about becoming famous and making everybody adulate him and getting attention, attracting investors, incredibly jealous of his competitor Edison, who was much more successful at being that kind of a soul. Well, maybe, but, I don't see many people worshiping Edison, and I see a whole bunch of Tesla worshipers. Go figure. Is the Tesla worship a cult? Absolutely. They believe in pseudoscience. They believe in pseudoscience that cannot be reproduced. And they still think that, it's just because the government covered it all up. They buried all of Tesla's stuff and blah, blah, blah. Well, maybe there's a bit of truth to that. But it's also true that Tesla was irresponsible in his creations. A lot of what he was doing was dual-use technology, kind of like atomic bombs, that if not used responsibly could do a lot of damage. Just look at, for example, all the furor that's being raised over the radiation of new telecommunications technologies, 5G, new kinds of wireless, satellite wireless. What's that going to do? What are those radiations going to do to different species? Do they cause colony collapse disorder in bees? Do they disorient migratory birds and disrupt their patterns of survival and breeding? This was the kind of stuff that Tesla was dabbling in, that the modern day Teslas are dabbling in. And it's dangerous stuff. The transhumanist agenda, the eugenics program of organ transplants to keep the elite alive, which is going on behind the Great Firewall of China. This is irresponsible science. Weird science. Dangerous science. Science being committed by folks that have no appreciation for the work of the spiritual scientists that created the multiverse. Didn't just create it, I'm going to make it like this and it's perfect. If this is how you think of God, if this is how you think of creation, you're a fool, you're an idiot. Nobody can create perfect things out of their thoughts. Nobody's that smart, especially not God. The real creators are scientists. Scientists have ideas, they have hypotheses, they test them. If they can't test them directly, they build an experiment. Every new chip that goes in every new cell phone is an experiment. It's tested, but they can't test everything, so eventually the customer gets to be the guinea pig. And you know what happens if you let the customer do all your testing? You get vaccines that are worse than the virus they were supposed to cure. This is irresponsible creation. This is ungodly creation. And it's got to stop, or our species will naturally destroy itself or get destroyed by another species that sees it as a threat. This is the way of nature. This is the way of creation. This is the constant battle between Borg and God. There's no real good guys or bad guys. The whole point of the game is to keep it going on as long as possible and teach players to play it more responsibly. Will there be irresponsible players? Of course. That's what we need laws for. That's what we need governments for. Are governments perfect? No. That's what we need balances of power for. Checks and balances. That's why we keep working on making more perfect governments. There's no such thing as a perfect government, just as there's no such thing as a perfect God. If you think that way, you're thinking Borg thoughts. You're thinking authoritarian, totalitarian. I want to control everything and make everybody think like I think. This is Borg. This is Borg at work. At whatever level of authority, of power you're looking at. Okay, well, it's going to be a little shorter than normal, which I think maybe some of you will appreciate, but I think I've done a good job of covering this topic. If there's anything I left out and you have any questions, feel free to drop me a line. Till then, like, share, subscribe. Maybe even throw me a few gaudy bones. My finances have not been in as good a shape as I had hoped at this point. So that's about as close to a plug, I guess, as you're going to get from me. Till next time, this is Rob Trump for the Omnist Hour. Thanks for tuning in.